Amber, can you check with Priscilla and see exactly when Dr. Justin may join us? Because otherwise I'm going to go ahead and start with Dr. Gay. Gay, can you be on point ready?
I'm ready.
Yes.
Yes.
You've been ready for years. You're the expert.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'm ready.
Dr. Gay, we're just so honored to have you and Dr. Nkechi, Dr. Washington, and of course, Dr. Hansford, who will come as well.
Well, it's good to be here.
Thank you. And you're taking time from your meeting today. That is so appreciated. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome, although my colleagues are not happy, but
well, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to start in 3 minutes, everyone. So get your last coffee or whatever, and we're going to start in 3 minutes, okay? All right, we'll be right back to you in 3 minutes.
Local participation today, huh?
Yeah, we're very blessed.
Wow.
Part of our network.
Oh, yeah.
This part of it.
What time is it in oh, she left. What time is it in Australia now? She just walked away. What time is it in Australia?
Hello, everybody. I usually don't tell people because they're like, are you in this world? But now it's 11:30 p.m. on Tuesday night.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we live in the future.
Mind giving us the greeting from the Congresswoman? Would you be willing to do that? And introduce your guests as well as the proper protocol. Great, that's his back. So as soon as it gets back, we'll get started. Make sure you get enough to eat.
Oh, yeah.
You see, I got plenty. Good news is if you don't eat it, there's plenty of birds around that will take care of it, but it was for you. So are we all ready for ALC? Yeah?
Oh, yeah, we're pulling it together. Had a meeting last night. Got another one this evening. For Energy Brain Trust.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, right now, we're trying to confirm the president of the Congo
Wonderful.
and some sort of representation from another African nation,
Excellent.
Cameroon. So,
Wow, a lot going on there.
Yeah, and that's just the energy piece. So, of course, we have the judiciary committees.
Oh,
Black
okay.
youth and government, stuff like that. So, but I'm focused on the energy thing because Houston was considered like the energy capital, right? So the congressman's congressional district it sits in a Heartland district. So
Yeah.
so naturally, she has a lot to say about it. And every year during CDC, we pull together, a brain trust as well as a panel discussion around that, and also do something called like a meet and match. Of blacks that are in energy are at the table and are matching with, so that's something we've been doing for the past few years, honestly. So,
Right.
and of course, she has things going on in Houston, some other endeavors. So hopefully, if things go the way they need to go, she will make a transition, and then this CBC would be like trying to cement legacy.
Right.
So
We're going to be missing her. Can you change her mind? Can you change her mind? We need her. The whole reparatory justice thing. I mean, she's such a...
HR 40, yeah.
Oh, God. What's going to do without you? Yeah. Okay, who's she grooming to come up along? We need somebody to follow her. If she insists on leaving them.
Yeah, she hasn't made any announcements. We don't know just yet.
All right. Well, I guess we'll just have to learn it as we go.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Wait here for him. Let's start here just a second. But yeah, I think if you can make a greeting and then also remind people about the ALC, it's coming up.
Sure.
And all of that.
Sure.
Yeah. Let's give it some shout out.
And you just let me know when you want me to do that.
Oh, I will. Here is the Reverend Ronson Wood and his special guest. everything's operating here. Beforehand, he's ready. Oh, I know, he's a living meeting. I mean, everything's so secure. Okay. All right, everyone. Here, okay. It was just there. What happened? Oh, here you go. Sorry. Okay, welcome everyone. I believe we're going to start our program now. Welcome to this forum that is dealing with the issue of Black August. We are in the season of Black August. And if you're not familiar with Black August, we're here to tell you it matters. Black August was started years ago by a man named George Jackson. He was imprisoned out in California. And he decided he was going to use that opportunity to work with others, to educate, to move toward liberation and freedoms for people of African descent. And since those times, it's been a movement of many at the grassroots level saying that we need to remember the unsung heroes and sheroes, and that we need to educate ourselves accordingly for the freedom struggle before people of Africa and of African descent. This is also the month, and remember Mr. Mandela was also in prison on Robben Island. This is also the month of the birthday of Mr. Barack Obama, our former president of the United States. This is also the month of the International Day of People of African Descent on this Thursday, on this past Saturday. Yes. Where were many of us? Yes, we were here in Washington, D.C., marching for freedom. Remembering 1963, when the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King took the podium for the world, not just for the nation, but for the world, to say, not only do I have a dream, but I have a plan. And many of the ingredients in his speech speak to the issues that we will speak to today. He talked about a check that had bounced, for example. He talked about the trauma and the tears over the many years of people of Africa and of African descent. Yes, but he talked about the great hope, not only the lament. And so on Saturday, there were thousands of us that came together here again to not only to commemorate, but to continue the march toward freedom. And of course, as people of faith, we know there is always hope. There is always new possibility. And one of those new possibilities is the new Forum of People of African Descent at the United Nations, which started last year and already has had 2 sessions. Now, what is unique about this forum is a couple of things. One is that it has a global consensus of people of African descent saying, this is not only a way forward for the member states, but for the world. It is a very important document. It is a document that has come from the 2 meetings that says there are now conclusions and recommendations to help move us forward. The meeting, the second meeting having just been held in New York in May, June of this year, will now lead us to a third meeting that will be held in Geneva, Switzerland in the spring of 2024. So you are most welcome to learn about this document, to learn about this movement. It is an exciting time. It does speak to the dream. One of the things we speak of, when we speak of Dr. King and Brother Malcolm and others, is the possibility of having a global agenda. And not just a global agenda, but one that has roots in policy to change structures and to change guidelines of how it is we are together as a community. 1963 was also the time when the African Union was founded. 1963 was also the time when the All Africa Conference of Churches was founded. 1962, Pan-African Women also helped to usher in 1963 with the African Union as well. So my brothers and sisters, there have been kindred movements that have happened that make this 60th so very important, as we also remember the Pan-African Congresses that refused to accept the imperialism of the Berlin Conference in 1884 to 85. So yes, this year is very special, and we begin our time together thanking God and thanking you for your leadership, where you are and what you are doing. So on behalf of the Advocacy for Africa Network, and on behalf of partners who are joining us in this moment, we say thank you for joining us. It is now my great pleasure to bring to you greetings from Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. We're honored to have two of her leading leaders in her office that are with us, the Reverend Bronson Woods from Atlanta, Georgia, from, you guessed it, Ebenezer Baptist Church, the Church of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and his guest. He will give a brief greeting, he and his guest, and then we'll go right into the program that is before us. Reverend Woods, would you kindly greet us and say a word quickly around the devotional reflection? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Angelique Walker-Smith. On behalf of the office of Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee, who's been serving in Congress, fighting hard for the past 28 years, I greet you. As you all know, it's the seat of the late Barbara Jordan, as well as Mickey Leland. And you know, in the month of August, early August 1989, Mickey Leland gave his life in a humanitarian mission in Ethiopia. So because of that and other purposes, this office is always inextricably a part of what's going on in Africa, Ethiopia, Nigeria, all across. So we are happy to be here and be all ears. This year is an intern in our office. Her name is Gabrielle Lowe Owens. She's a student at Williams College, also a graduate of the Porter's Girls School out of Massachusetts. So we're here to be a presence and to try to move with the agenda, doing what's right for our people, so that bread will be provided throughout the world.
That's wonderful, Reverend Woods. Thank you so much for joining us, and to have them here in person is, of course, very special. Enjoying our breakfast here together, I might add. Well, friends, welcome again. Unfortunately, we will not have time for everyone to introduce each other. What we ask you to do is use the chat as a way of giving input into the discussions. We are moving to a 3-part series. This is one of 3 parts of a series where we're trying to build out a strategy. Of course, the theme being rebuilding a Pan-African strategy. And we think that this document that we will be discussing will help create a kind of roadmap as we think about what that might look like for some of us. On behalf of Bread for the World, I'm so pleased that we are also a partner in this. And we look forward to the active use, I want to say again, the active use of the chat. There will be time for Q&A and clarifications that move us to those other 2 parts of the series that will be coming to you. We'll announce at the end of our time together. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce to you one of our 4 guests that is here today to give us a presentation on her thinking about this document, the conclusions or recommendations But even more than that, for her to share as really, if I may say so, a matriarch of this movement is none other than Dr. Gay McDougall. Dr. Gay McDougall is an independent expert who serves on the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, better known to some of us as CERD. Dr. McDougall is currently a senior fellow and distinguished scholar in residence at the Leitner Center on International Law and Justice, Fordham University School of Law, and is the adjunct professor there. Dr. McDougall has spent her career working on issues of race and gender and economic justice in the United States and in the global context. She has been a leader on human rights as well as other issues within the UN for more than 3 decades, holding very important positions there, including 6 years as the first UN Special Rapporteur on minority issues and 8 years of service on the UN Committee on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. Special Rapporteur on the issue of systemic rape and sexual slavery practices, and played a leadership role in the UN Third World Conference Against Racism in Durban, 2001. Dr. McDougall was a member of the South African governmental body that created to administer its first democratic non-racial election in 1994. And she is a recipient of South Africa's National Medal of Honor, the Order of Oliver Tambo Medal for that extraordinary contributions to ending apartheid. She is truly an icon that we can certainly honor and celebrate. We're going to ask her to give us a little background from Durban, and then we're going to go over to Dr. Hansford, who will talk about the document, and we're going to come back to Dr. McDougall, as you can see why, toward the end about the research components and the importance of empirical work that go into the work before us. But Dr. McDougall, can you please tell us just a little bit about Durban? I don't know that everyone really knows what happened there and what your thoughts may be in a brief kind of way. Then we'll go to Dr. Hansford. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. Let me just suggest that I actually start with my presentation on the topic of the day. I'm very nervous that I'm going to lose bandwidth here. So let me just cut to the chase. You know, I've been in Geneva all month in the latest session of the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. But this is a time when my mind and heart are back home in the United States. I'm thinking about the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. It's already been noted, but also the optimism that we felt at that time, the hope that we had for a future without racism. But at the same time, I have also been thinking about what happened in Jacksonville, Florida. You know, will we ever be able to escape the deep hatred somehow? You know, 3 more lives lost. But we must continue to hope, to educate, to impact, if necessary, one person at a time. And let's remember that it is when we're making progress that the backlash comes. So today, in this webinar, we are celebrating progress. And I just want to, you know, talk for a second to have us all think from whence we came to this day of the Permanent Forum. In 1903, W.B. Du Bois said that racism will be ended only with the collective commitment of all nations of the world. In 1920, about 103 years ago, Marcus Garvey made the proclamation of the International Declaration of the Rights of Black people, the Black people of the world. In 1940, in the 1940s, W.B. Du Bois, Mary McLeod Bethune, Walter White, and others were active lobbyists at the conference to form the United Nations because they believed that the UN would be a venue in which more expansive rights would be declared for Black Americans. And the NAACP was the first civil society organization to submit a petition to the United Nations. At that time, the new entity of the United Nations, for an investigation of the ways in which those rights were being violated in the United States. So only now, after that long period of history, only now do we have an institutional body of the United Nations that has the possibility of realizing these dreams for Black people around the world. This past December, the launch of the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, there were upwards of 900 African diaspora people in attendance from every corner of the globe. They came to speak their truths, to make clear their grievances, but most important, to claim their rights and to speak about their aspirations for a new world. And the creation of the Permanent Forum also gives momentum for the drafting and adoption of a UN Declaration on the Rights of African Descendants, which could potentially change the normative framework for the rights of African descendant peoples around the world. Now, I know somebody else in this webinar is going to talk in depth about the concept and the progress we made so far on the declaration. But I've been asked to talk about the fact that the Permanent Forum has emphasized the critical importance of the recognition of systemic structural racial discrimination as it affects people of African descent. And so I've been asked to spend a few minutes teasing out what that means. And if it's okay, Angelique, I think I should do that now. Again, I'm a little bit nervous about losing bandwidth as the day goes.
Dr. Gay, it is your platform. Please go
Okay.
right ahead. We're honored to have you as long as we can, because you are in Switzerland after all. And
Yes, that's right. And so I'm going to speak about how we on the UN Committee Against Racism that I sit on have conceptualized and operationalized that terminology, structural racism, in a way that has allowed us to examine the realities in countries all around the world. You know, we talk about intentional and non-intentional discrimination, direct and indirect discrimination, de jure and de facto discrimination. So let's just talk about direct discrimination first. It's the product, if you will, of the bias and specific intention of an individual to do harm or to discriminate against other people. It is only in rare cases that you can prove the causal connection between a person's bias and a racially harmful condition that affects large numbers of people. We can do it in many one-to-one situations. We can certainly do it in the situation that occurred in Jacksonville. significantly because he has left a manifesto. But most situations that are racially harmful, that impact your life and my life on a daily basis, most have no point of origin or intention that can be located or identified. Many of those points of origin were long ago, lost in time or history now, but nevertheless, they continue to harm lives on an intergenerational basis. So structural racism, especially systemic structural racism, is pervasive now. It is embedded in laws, codified in customs and policies, and it perpetuates inequalities, intergenerational poverty, and chronic injustice for some, while it also perpetuates privilege and wealth for others. It is embedded in the structures of institutions that govern us and determine every aspect of our futures. And it replicates itself inside those institutions silently, insidiously, and without further initiation by any specific actors, so that it becomes, well, as they say, just the way things are. So to dismantle it, we must be intentional and determined in our actions. In the Committee Against Racism, the definition of structural racism is that we use is pretty simple. Any inequality between racial groups is per se discriminatory, unless you can come up with a really good justification for it. We use statistics to spot such differences in every society and in every aspect of society. Then we analyze that data through a deeper social, international, and historical lens. We use evidence-based indicators of whether there is an equal enjoyment of dignity, rights, and non-discrimination across every aspect of the society. And what that requires is, in the first instance, comprehensive disaggregated data collection across all areas of society. So when we do find inequalities that cannot be justified, then governments are under the treaty that we oversee, the International Convention Against Racial Discrimination, now ratified by 185 countries. So it's pretty broad in its acceptance. Then those governments, by the way, the US has ratified it, and they are required, mandated to fashion special measures, affirmative action policies based on that data. And the outcome of those affirmative action policies must be to close the gaps. So the Permanent Forum is calling for the mainstreaming of evidence-based equity considerations in all relevant and all policymaking across all areas of society. So let me say that again. The Permanent Forum is calling for the mainstreaming of evidence-based equity considerations in all relevant policymakers across all areas of society. I'm going to stop there. Now, I don't know whether you want to take questions. It might be a good time for people to raise questions against what I've said. If not, we can go on to other speakers and take questions at the end. I'm not sure, again, how long my bandwidth is going to go. So it might be good to raise one or two questions to me now.
Dr. McDougall, we just thank you so much. I mean, what is a very technical task, a very legalese task? You have described so that many of us who don't have that privilege can basically understand. So thank you so much. But the devil is in the details, hell is. So everything you're saying is critical to advancing this vision of hope and of freedom. So we thank you so much. Dr. McDougall, I don't see any responses in the chat. Again, I want to remind everyone, the chat is the key place where we can see if you have a comment. Please add your responses. This is not just about Q&A, but it also is about clarifications and contributions to a strategy we're trying to build out. So Dr. McDougall, just at this point, just to celebrate, it looks like everyone got it. And that's great. We do have one comment I do see here from Emira Woods, who I know you know from Adna. And so I'm going to invite her to briefly share her comment or question, and then we're going to go right on to Dr. Hansford, because we have him, I think, for an abbreviated period as well. Ms. Woods, would you like to speak now? Thank you for being with us.
Oh, apologies also for being off screen. Just want to thank you for this presentation, for this incredible convening. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Angelique, for your leadership. I just wonder that, I kept hearing about this, the international regulation being in place, 180 plus countries, signatories, including the US. So what happens when the US Supreme Court puts out a ruling as they did, very much turning back the clock on affirmative action? And what happens when countries that are signatories do not uphold the mandate? Thank you so much for your work and your leadership, and for taking time to do this presentation today, and for responding. Appreciate all you do.
Shall I respond now? I can.
Do as quickly as you're able, just because we know of your bandwidth and also the speakers. Thank you so much.
Well, we actually immediately put out a decision that the United States was in violation of its obligations under our treaty because of this rollback of affirmative action policies. Affirmative action, as I said, is required when there are inequalities in societies. So there was clearly you take the statistics, you look at them, it's a clear case. The number of African Americans going to elite colleges as opposed to the white students, and which did not actually correlate to the applications that were received by those institutions. So they got to have affirmative action policies. They got to have policies which close that gap. And while the affirmative action policies that have been in place for many decades were moving slowly in the direction of closing that gap, there's been a whole generation, myself included, that would not have had the education that we did, but for those policies being in place. And we have evidence that in places like Michigan, like California, where legislation was put in place that prohibited race-based, race-conscious policies in admissions, that immediately the number of African-American students in the next entering class plummeted. So we know, the statistics tell us that it needs to be in place. We know that it has worked, although slowly, and we know that when those policies are removed, the numbers, tank immediately. So, the simple response to the question is that we immediately took a decision and have issued it widely. It's on the UN website that the UN is in violation of that the US is in violation of its obligations under the treaties. Now, we don't have a way of creating greater sanctions than that. But we look for diplomacy among member states of the UN to hopefully take it further.
Dr. McDougall, thank you so much. This is very, very important. In other words, there's someone watching what's going on in the United States. And it's not just us. There are the nations of the world that have treaties and have agreements that behavior that we've seen in recent days is not acceptable. Someone has to document that. Someone has to track that. We have one of the leading experts right here who helps us to do that. And that is why data and empirical work is critically important to the vision of freedom and justice. And to let the nation states know, thus saith that this is not the way forward. Dr. McDougall, we can't thank you enough for your work. We can't thank you enough for what you will do and for all you've been. Thank you so much for being with us. If you can't stay on, we will come back to you if your bandwidth will allow and your time, because already you've been so generous. Thank you so much. And thank you, Ms. Woods, for that important question. I would like to now go to Dr. Hansford, Dr. Justin Hansford. It's my understanding that he is on the line now. We are delighted to have you, Dr. Hansford. Dr. Hansford represents the United States on the UN Permanent Forum of People of African Descent. He also founded the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center at the great Howard University. In 2017, he is professor there, and it was previously a Democracy Project Fellow at Harvard University, a visiting professor of law at Georgetown University Law Center, and an associate professor of law at St. Louis University. He has a BA from Howard University and a JD from Georgetown University Law Center, where he was a founder of the Georgetown Journal of Law and Modern Critical Race Perspective. He has also received a Fulbright Scholar Award to study the legal career of Nelson Mandela and served as a clerk for Judge Dalen Key on the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. He is a leading scholar and activist in the areas of critical race theory, human rights, law, and social movements, and the co-author of the forthcoming 7th edition of Race, Racism, and American Law, the celebrated legal textbook that was the first casebook published specifically for teaching race-related law courses. His interdisciplinary scholarship has appeared in academic journals at various universities, including Harvard, Georgetown, Fordham, and the University of California at Hastings. In the wake of the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, Dr. Hansford worked to empower the Ferguson community through community-based legal advocacy and co-authored the Ferguson to Geneva Human Rights Shadow Report and accompanied the Ferguson protesters and Mike Brown's family to Geneva, Switzerland, to testify at the United Nations. Dr. Hansford, we are honored to have you. Thank you for your leadership in helping to create the Permanent Forum of People of African Descent. please, if you can pick up where Dr. McDougall left off in terms of where are we now with the permanent forum, how do we get there, and very much an overview, if you could, of the conclusions and recommendations that we are with now. Thank you again. We are honored to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. I hope you can hear me okay. I am very, very honored to be on this call. I see a number of familiar faces on the Zoom. I'm not going to take up too much time. I'm actually also on another Zoom call at the same time. The permanent forum is having a meeting as we speak, but I did want to hop off and talk to you to give you an update on our progress, because I do believe that's important. And then I may have to hop back onto the permanent forums meeting. We have had 17 informal meetings, essentially monthly informal meetings. And this is one of those informal meetings that we've had. Tomorrow, we plan to issue our first conclusions and recommendations document. This is going to encapsulate our main takeaways from the first two sessions, as well as our recommendations for action. One of our purposes as a permanent forum, from what I understand, is, remember, this is a new entity, so part of it is in our hands to determine its purpose, but one of the capacities we have is to gather the attention of the United Nations and to be able to speak directly to different elements of the bureaucracy that is the United Nations on behalf of people of African descent. One of the ways we can do so is through our conclusions and our recommendations that we issue after our sessions. Usually we will issue one of these documents after each session, but in this case, we're issuing one after our first two sessions, because our first session happened so quickly. Remember, our first session was in December of 2022. Our second session ended May 30th to June 3rd of 2023. And our next session will be in March of 2024. From now on, our sessions will be on a yearly basis, so we'll have more time to gather information. This first session and second session only had about a 6-month gap. We also have the capacity to issue advocacy letters to push the UN to take action on particular issues. Our first advocacy letter will be on the issue of Haiti. Many of you are aware of all of the atrocities happening in Haiti, which we believe is primarily a result of colonialism and structural racism, and really an attempt to, in a sense, punish Haiti for being the first place where Black people rose up and resisted through even revolution to overturn enslavement. We think it's important that we look at the way that we solve the issue in Haiti through a reparations lens, and not simply through a militaristic interventionist lens as is currently being conceptualized. So I'm part of a working group on the permanent forum on Haiti. We have a number of different committees and working groups, and I'm also a member of the youth committee on the permanent forum. Not particularly young myself, I don't believe, but I'm the youngest member, and I have had 2 meetings with youth, people who are truly accurately in the category of youth, I think under the age of 25. And we're seeking to engage more youth into the work of the permanent forum. One of the things that I hope will come from our youth committee's actions will be a newsletter where the activities of the current members are detailed in a more accessible way, so people understand what the permanent forum members are doing on a monthly basis. All of us are very active, attending conferences and working on behalf of the Permanent Forum and really hopefully working on behalf of people of African descent through the mechanism of the UN. As Professor McDougall so eloquently stated, one of the major objectives of the work is to obtain disaggregated data that will allow us to be able to advocate more specifically on these issues. I'm of the strong opinion that once we obtain that data and learn of these disparities, we will see that those disparities are a result not of public policy from the current mayor or governor or president of the jurisdiction, but more so those disparities are the result of structural racism that is decades and centuries old, and true bridging of, say, the wealth gap or the gap in health access to healthcare or the gap in other essential needs can only be solved through reparations. Reparations continues to be the essential lens through which the members of the Permanent Forum, I can say, view questions of justice. I made the statement in our last session that reparations is what justice looks like in the 21st century. And I continue to hold that opinion, especially for our people. And if you had to encapsulate the goals of the Permanent Forum in a nutshell right now, I think you can say the creation of a second decade for people of African descent is a really high priority on our agenda. Also, the creation of a declaration of rights on people of African descent. That declaration is high on the agenda. Of course, the continued effort to obtain disaggregated data on people of African descent is high on the agenda. We are partnering with different universities to do town hall meetings and obtain data on the state of Black people in different parts of the world. Along with Howard University students, I've been working to obtain data on the state of Black communities in different cities. We've done San Francisco, Chicago, Cleveland, Baltimore, and we try to obtain data on the state of Black people in a particular city, measuring the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as you're using using the Sustainable Development Goals as a metric to determine Black people's well-being in a particular city. But going back to that list, the declaration, disaggregated data, the creation of a second decade, and also I would put reparations and facilitating reparations campaigns as another high level of priority for us. That includes continuing the legacy of the Durban Declaration. You could almost use the moniker of 4Ds, the Durban Declaration's commitment to reparations, data, disaggregated data, a new decade, and a declaration of rights for people of African descent, to think about our agenda at the current stage that we are in. I am really interested in hearing from more of you as experts, the experts that you are. As I know many of you know more than me when it comes to these issues. So I'd really love to hear your input on the Permanent Forum as it stands, or things that we could do in the future to be helpful. I don't think the Permanent Forum's true, ultimate, definitive shape has yet taken form. We've had 2 sessions. The first session was introductory and celebratory. The second session was really our first substantive working experience. That was in June. So it's a very short time period. But I think that this is an urgent moment where, just like in the beginning of any other type of project, the way that it begins will shape the way that it exists moving forward. So please continue to be engaged. Please continue to reach out to myself or other members with your thoughts. We are looking in the next few months to have more activity. Myself and the chair will be at the UN General Assembly meetings, September 18th through 26th. There should be, I'm not sure if Professor McDougall mentioned that in October, there is a planned convening of different UN mechanisms that work on anti-racism activities. So we should be engaged in that in October. I'm hoping that we will also have some sort of session coming up in November, perhaps in Brazil. That was announced at the last session by Ms. Franco, the Brazilian Minister on Racial Justice. So we're hoping that that materializes in November. We're looking to gather information about issues happening in Black Europe in December with a session there, consultation there. And then, of course, in March, we'll have our next session in Geneva. We'd love to have your participation and attendance if you're able. So that's a quick summary, a quick overview of the document. I see Mr. Harrison asked for, Paula Rhodes has asked for the Permanent Forum's role for the draft declaration. The draft declaration is, we have one member, Pastor Murillo, who has been our assigned envoy to the drafting process, which has included at this current stage, to be honest, representatives of the working group on Durban, that is primarily state-based representatives. I will say my strong desire is to see more civil society activity and involvement in the drafting of the declaration. There was a period where there was a call for inputs on the declaration, I believe last year around this time. We are looking to create more consultations so more members of civil society can tell us what they would like to see in the declaration. That's something that we are continuing to, that's one of the reasons we are seeking to have more consultations. If we have a consultation in Brazil, consultation in Europe, if we can find a consultation opportunity in the United States, what we plan to do is of course, gather information about what's happening for people of African descent in that area, disaggregated data, but also receive input on what people in that region would like to see in our declaration. Yes, please give input on drafts of the declaration. And in terms of the quick overview of the document, it's if you look at the Declaration of Rights for Indigenous Peoples that was created by the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples, it's not meant to mimic that document, of course, but that will give you a general overview. I can put a link into the chat, but the idea will be to outline essential human rights that are guaranteed to people of African descent, which I fully expect will include reparations, but will also include other issues that have been raised in our sessions and that people like Nkechi Taifa and Gay McDougall and others have advocated on for years, including access to, some sort of relief from structural racism in all of its forms, economic inequality, health inequality, educational access. Is really something that's in our hands to determine in terms of what the content of it will be. But the point of it is to create a document that can be signed by states. If you look at the Declaration of Rights for Indigenous People, over 170 governments signed on to that document, which is a commitment they made to seek to uphold the statements in the document. And the goal would be to make this not only something symbolic, but an actual legal instrument that we can use to hold governments accountable for respecting the rights of people of African descent. That's our goal. So yes, the preliminary conclusions and recommendations document will be released tomorrow. That's our belief. And you'll see that very shortly. What you'll see there is essentially our statements calling for some core interventions by the UN into the issues that were raised in the sessions. That document only covers issues raised in the sessions. It doesn't go outside of that, the things that were raised on the floor of the UN during one of our first 2 sessions. But of course, it talks about our desire to see a special tribunal on reparations at the UN, our desire to see a more assertive effort to intervene into the crisis of Black maternal health care. And we have issues that, just a number of issues that we heard on the panels and people speaking from the floor of the first 2 sessions. We correlated that into a document and issued our view of how the UN could make a successful intervention on those issues. So it's a long document. I can't go into too much detail, but you'll see it in the next 2 or 3 days. It's going to give you a really thorough understanding of the work of the forum thus far.
Dr. Hansford, we can't thank you enough for your time and the generosity of sharing. We appreciate your leadership very much. And just so you know, this is one of 3 in a series. We're moving toward what we believe we're hearing that can contribute to the consultative process that you've identified. So for us, this is not just, if you will, quote, a talk shop. We're trying to move towards some concrete recommendations, educative processes, but input from civil society. So if you do have a consultation in the US, we would love to be a part of that. We've been committed to that with the Pan-African Working Group of all the different partners, and we look forward to partnering with you in the future. Thank you so much, and thank you for going right ahead with the chat to entertain the questions there. We will look forward to having a relationship with you going forward. Thank you so much, Dr. Hansford. God bless. We now like to bring on our third speaker. Our third speaker is Dr. Nkechi Taifa. He already spoke the name, so you already know she's in the house. She is a civil and human rights attorney. She is the executive director of the Reparation Education Project, and last year delivered a TEDx talk on reparations. Attorney Taifa is the author of a memoir, Black Power, Black Lawyer, My Audacious Quest for Justice and Reparations on Fire, How and Why It's Spreading Across America. As Dr. Hansford has said, reparatory justice is a key piece of what it is the Permanent Forum has been discussing. Here we have an expert on the theme and someone who has engaged it, not only an educator, but an activist. Dr. Nkechi, please share with us now. You have the document as well. If you could help us understand what you think the document is saying so far relative to the work that you've already been doing. Thank you so much.
I would like to thank the Pan-African Working Group of ADNA, the Advocacy Network for Africa, Reverend Angelique Walker-Smith, Mark Harrison, and others for inviting me to share a few words as part of this rebuilding a Pan-African global agenda during these last few days of Black August. I also would like to acknowledge the presence of the office of Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee, and I would like to thank Dr. Gay McDougall for her long-standing, trailblazing work on issues of global significance to people of African descent, and to my brother, Justin Hansford, as the United States representative to the UN Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. So I'm just going to say a few words addressing a matter of profound significance, the issue of reparations for the Black world. The global reparations movement is gaining momentum today, demanding acknowledgement and accountability for the systemic racism and discrimination that persists today. From Ta-Nehisi Coates' powerful advocacy to CARICOM's reparations agenda, to the preliminary conclusions and recommendations from the UN Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, this issue transcends borders, recognizing the shared history and struggles of Black people worldwide. In our pursuit of reparatory justice, we must delve into the visionary framework set forth by the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, through their 10-point program for reparatory justice. This transformative program outlines crucial steps to rectify historical injustices and pave the way for a more equitable future. Their 10-point program includes a formal apology from slave trading nations, support for building institutions for health, education, and cultural development, debt cancellation, technological transfer and capacity building, psychosocial support, cultural repatriation, indigenous peoples development program, African knowledge program, public health crisis initiative, and an equitable development fund. The CARICOM initiative recognizes the need for holistic measures that address historical exploitation, cultural erasure, and socioeconomic disparities. And as we advocate for reparations on a global scale, let us draw inspiration from CARICOM's comprehensive approach. In the ever-evolving global movement for reparations, the voices advocating for justice continue to gain momentum. Black communities worldwide, alongside African and Caribbean nations, are pressing for reparations to address the continuing impacts of the Ma'afa of the transatlantic Holocaust, enslavement, Jim Crow apartheid, and colonialism. Prominent nations, including Jamaica, Brazil, and the United States, are at the forefront of this conversation. Calls for reparations are gaining traction as descendants of Africans enslaved throughout the diaspora demand acknowledgement, apology, and tangible redress for the systemic injustices they have endured. And it is fitting that the UN Permanent Forum on People of African Descent has affirmed the calling for an extension of the International Decade for People of African Descent to a second decade, 2025 to 2034, as part of its conclusions and recommendations. In addition to CARICOM, the dialogue around reparations for the historical injustices of enslavement has prompted responses from European nations, recognizing their role in perpetuating profound suffering. The Netherlands, for instance, recently witnessed their king issue an apology for their country's involvement in the Ma'afa, the transatlantic Holocaust and enslavement. During a speech commemorating the 150th anniversary of the abolition of enslavement in the Netherlands Caribbean colonies, he acknowledged the horrors of enslavement and correctly stated that its consequences are still felt today. The European Union has acknowledged the untold suffering caused by enslavement and has hinted at the possibility of reparations. The EU statement recognizes the immense pain and suffering inflicted by the Ma'afa of the transatlantic Holocaust and colonialism. While not explicitly stating support for reparations, the EU's acknowledgement of the deep impact of enslavement marks a long overdue step towards addressing historical injustices. And this stance reflects the global growing conversation surrounding reparations and the need to reckon with the legacies of enslavement and colonialism. Just last week, a leading judge at the International Court of Justice has said that the UK will no longer be able to ignore the growing call for reparation for the Ma'afa of the transatlantic Holocaust. Judge Patrick Robinson, who presided over the trial of the former Yugoslav president Milosevic, said the international tide on slavery reparations was quickly shifting and urged the UK to change its current position on the issue. The judge stated that the payment of reparations, quote, is required by history and it is required by law, end of quote. Judge Robinson played a key role in writing and compiling the Brattle Group report on reparations for transatlantic chattel slavery, which was published in June. The report, which has been described as the most comprehensive state-to-state reparations analysis, identifies the reparations that are due in respect of 31 countries in which transatlantic enslavement was practiced. The study estimates that trillions of dollars are owed in reparations to countries affected by transatlantic enslavement, and that the UK alone is required to pay a sum of $24 trillion as reparations for transatlantic slavery in 14 countries. The report factors in the wealth and GDP amassed by countries that enslaved African people. It is important to note that the Permanent Forum's preliminary recommendations references the pursuit of reparatory justice and its human rights, legal and institutional grounds at the International Court of Justice, as well as the International Law Commission, and that the General Assembly should consider commissioning an independent international study on reparatory justice for people of African descent. The Permanent Forum also recommended that the General Assembly and other relevant United Nations organs consider requesting an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on the legal question of reparatory justice for histories and legacies of the enslavement era. This is critical because there is so much resistance to any type of reparatory justice for those scattered throughout the diaspora. It is critical because we seem to be the only people where redress and amends are ignored, dismissed, or denied. Indeed, as enslavement ended throughout the British Empire in the 19th century, Parliament approved the payment of 20 million pounds, about 300 million pounds in today's money, not to formerly enslaved Africans, but to their enslavers as compensation. In fact, the United Kingdom took out a loan to pay reparations to slave owners in 1833 and only paid off the debt a couple of years ago in the year 2015. When the United States ended enslavement in 1865, it paid reparations, not to those of us who suffered, but to our white enslavers, the same way Britain paid reparations to its enslavement holders when it formally abolished slavery in 1834. And the same way the Republic of Haiti was egregiously mandated as a condition of recognition of its freedom to pay reparations to the French, it had defeated to achieve independence. And that brings us to another of the Permanent Forum's preliminary recommendations that the Human Rights Council consider organizing a panel discussion to address the grave human rights situation in Haiti through reparatory justice for a sustainable address of the humanitarian crisis in Haiti and its historical legacies in a manner that centers the well-being, and future of the Haitian people. And this is a possible step towards the establishment of a Human Rights Council, independent international commission of inquiry on the subject, another of the conclusions and recommendations from the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. So, as the global conversation intensifies, steps such as these towards international acknowledgement and accountability mark a significant shift in acknowledging the enduring impact of historical atrocities against the Black world. And yes, in addition to a UN Global Summit on Reparatory Justice, other recommendations from the Permanent Forum include a fund for the development of people of African descent to address the lasting consequences of enslavement, colonialism, apartheid, and genocide, and a UN Reparatory Justice Commission to facilitate concrete action on reparatory justice, sustainable development, and equity. I want to thank Professor Chinwesu of Nigeria, author of The West and the Rest of Us, who perhaps put it best as he noted some 30 years ago in a 1993 major address at the second plenary session of the first Pan-African Conference on Reparations in Abuja. He said, "We must acknowledge that we are not the only people in the world who are seeking or who have sought reparations. In fact, by only now generating a mass movement in pressing our claim for reparations, we are latecomers. I would not at this time catalog the precedents for reparations paid and pending. He said, I will just suffice it to say that with such precedents for reparations to non-Black people spanning 4 continents, it would be sheer racism for the world to discountenance reparations claims from the Black world. But our own search for reparations, he said, must of its necessity be tailored to our own peculiar experience. Some others may need only that their ancestral home range be returned to them. Some others that acts of genocide and other atrocities against their people be atoned for and paid for. Some others that land excised from their territory be paid for. We, however, who have experienced all of the above and more, and experienced them for much longer than most, and therefore suffer chronically from their effects, we must take a more comprehensive view of what reparations must mean for us. We must ask not only that reparations be made for specific acts, we who have been such monumental victims are obliged to also ask what sort of systems and policies and practices made this long Holocaust possible, and what must be done to transform these systems and policies and practices such that injustice will never be so inflicted again. So my brothers and sisters, as Black August comes to an end this year, what does this all mean? Simply this: African people all over the world are on fire, waking up to the reality of a real practical move toward true justice. The collective we are beginning to understand that we are one people who went through the same genocidal, traumatic, and Holocaustal suffering committed by another group of people and their instrumentalities who unjustly and lucratively profited from our pain and sufferings. The descendants of that group have been empowered since that time. And the descendants of those of us who were exploited and traumatized are demanding a long overdue reckoning on race throughout the world. In the words of Malcolm X, in this day, this time, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary.
Well, now we know why you are the expert on this subject. You have given us in 14 minutes an overview and a way forward at the same time. Thank you so much, Dr. Taifa. We are grateful for your passion. We're grateful for the way in which you have informed us and the ways in which this folds in so beautifully with what it is the Permanent Forum is seeking to advance. Thank you so much. I don't see any comments in the chat just yet, but friends, once again, that chat is for you to express what you've heard. We are going to come back to this conversation, and we certainly have great leadership to help us do that. Friends, we are coming to the end of our time, but not without hearing from Dr. Washington. We do have Dr. Washington in the house, and he is one of the experts dealing with the issues that have already been mentioned around health and trauma. He is a clinical psychologist and the founder and CEO of Nyanspo Empowerment Works Nuvu. This organization is committed to restoring power to those who feel powerless and to awakening the personal will within people to manifest their greatness, utilizing the wisdom of the ancestors and assisting people with actualizing their inner power. He is the acting president of the World Mental Health Coalition. A Fulbright Hays scholar, he researched the impact of institutions on the healing and restructuring of post-apartheid South Africa, Azania. It was in South Africa where he researched the philosophy of Ubuntu and how we can inform mental health service delivery to people of African ancestry and others. Not only does he work on healing and the psycho-spiritual wounds that are present within people as a result of cultural and historical trauma, Dr. Washington continues developing healing paradigms for people of African ancestry who have been impacted by persistent enslavement, systemic trauma, PESD. His work is critical to advancing and en route to psychology, psychotherapy, which he founded. He is the former chair of the Department of Sociology and Psychology at Grambling State University. And he is the former president of the Association of Black Psychologists from 2015 to 2017. Sadly, we've only been able to pick out a couple of the sub-themes within the document because we wanted to spend that time on informing around the document, the background. Again, this is the first of a three-part series. So now we move to this sub-theme that is intersectional with all the themes: trauma and health. Dr. Washington, will you come to us now? Thank you so much.
Thank you for allowing me to be here, part of this conversation. I want to make sure, can you hear me? I'll make sure the microphone works. Are we good? Can you hear me?
We're good for the next 14 minutes.
Right. So that is a tall order, because this entire conversation actually is much longer. And after hearing, of course, Mama and Nkechi talk about the conversation of reparations, that conversation alone is a form of re-traumatization, just to hear how the resources were meted out to the oppressor and not to the oppressed. I want to thank you all for allowing me to be here within the next hour that I have left. I apologize. You said 15 minutes. I will actually present what we can do that makes this make sense. The forum suggested adopting a specific programs or policies that will look at universal health care and mental health services. Secondly, it suggested supporting the development of culturally safe structures and processes within national systems and private organizations surrounding healthcare, including inter alia safe and cultural appropriate midwifery operations. This process of understanding the dynamics of the trauma, the psychological intergenerational trauma incurred by African people cannot be achieved by utilizing European discussion and nomenclature. Mama Nkechi clearly informed us of the construct of the Ma'afa, which is, of course, she said, is the African Holocaust experience. It is a claiming, a reclaiming of the experience, and not utilizing the so-called slave trade, which is a part of the Europeans' discourse that suggests that there was some kind of trade that took place. Whereas there was some trading that took place, there's something deeper that took place in the entire process. The experiences of the Ma'afa, or the enslavement experience, had a deleterious effect on the African psyche and have resulted in forms of assaults on spirit. Within the Zulu context, this is called ukufa kwabantu, which means the metaphysical illnesses and challenges to the people. The spirit wounds can be addressed by understanding the dynamics of what it means to be African or African spiritness. The word psychology comes out of the context of a word called saku, which means the essence of being. It is understanding that W.B. Du Bois says that men were stripped of any form of pride and self-respect during the process of the Ma'afa. Orlando Patterson says children witnessed their parents being degraded and humiliated in front of them, sexually and otherwise, which created a condition of psychic trauma and psychic duress. Children seeing their parents degraded not only cause a disconnection between parent and child, but also an estrangement with the children and what they can possibly become. This is critical to understand, because when we begin to look at the process of the making of a slave, going from an African to one who is enslaved, we said we have to move one from being a Yoruba, a Mandinka, a Mende, an Igbo, a Jola, a Wolof, a Fulé, Serer, moving that to become something that is less than human. We see this process that took place in the context of the seasoning elements of moving Africans from one space to another, to the Caribbean, to Brazil, to season them, to have them have a disconnect, which is a major form of cultural trauma. Cultural trauma occurs when a group of people experience a traumatic event that impacts the entire group of people. Some want to suggest that this group experience is only informed by the memory of the experience, but we want to suggest that systemic and structural institutional racism is not simply something that is in the memory, it is a lived experience. And so we talk about the cultural trauma and the identity assertion that comes from such. We must understand then that the process of enslavement, the process of causing wars and disruption on the continent, the process of economic destabilization is one that is of great traumatic experience. We must understand also that events of trauma occur to us daily when we talk about the media projection of Black inferiority. Sister McDougall mentioned earlier about the recent Jacksonville occurrence, which is a traumatizing experience, educational system of projection of a European superiority, disparities in healthcare systems, economic inequities, racial profile and disproportionate involvement with the U.S. penal system, mental health misdiagnosis, and political disenfranchisement. These events of trauma are ongoing. One cannot talk about the trauma events. We're talking about the trauma event responses, elevated levels of cortisol, high blood pressure, poor glucose regulations, lowered immune system are all a part of this entire process. This is informed by this notion of understanding that we have the sympathetic nervous system involved and the parasympathetic nervous system involved in the process of how we can deal with stress in experiences. The sympathetic nervous system is designed to stimulate adrenaline, and adrenaline is that which is a part of the fight or flight mechanism. And adrenaline is good when it begins to allow us to be mobilized to take action. It is bad that when it is prolonged within the body, it causes the body to break down. It causes high blood pressure, blockage in the arteries, and thus we're back to the same situation of sugar craving, high allostatic load, and other factors. We're suggesting then that the residual effects of this enslavement experience ties into the reparations conversation that was just had, that repair is a part of the word reparations, and we're repairing something that has been prolonged within the system of African people. Epigenetics gives us a great insight into this entire process. We understand that the process of epigenetics, that is that when we understand how the genes are modified from certain experiences, we can see then that the experiences of one generation becomes the genetic indices or indicator of how to respond in the next generation. Diaz and Resler did research on what does it mean to have an organism, have mice, to have a traumatic experience, and they noticed that the transfer of information of how to deal with that particular traumatic experience was encoded within the gametes or sex cells of those mice, and that was passed on to the next generation. The research was very simple. They had mice to experience trauma, a shock, when they smelled a certain chemical, and this chemical became encoded within the DNA of these mice. These mice would have pups that would never be shocked, but they would have the same smell, the odor. The odor triggered within them the trauma response, though they had never experienced the physical trauma. These mice would have pups that would have the same smell and have the same visceral response to the odor, though they were never shocked, which gives us indication to how we can see then that trauma can be passed on, the trauma responses can be passed on genetically. Dr. Amos Wilson tells us that the genetic inheritance, the genes, are not mere chemical packets that determine their physiological aspects, but the genes are encapsulated histories of the experiences of our people. In other words, the cultural history, the biological history, the climatic geographical history, the interaction of our people have had with the environment of the African continent and on in other places for thousands of years have carried right into the bodies of our children. It is a part of their psychology as well as their biology. Therefore, the education and/or therapy of healing must be based on the knowledge of that history and the psychology that flows from that history. This suggests then that transgenerational trauma must be looked at as a spirit injury phenomenon. It must be looked at as something that is passed on from generation to generation, the way that the amygdala, the septum, and hippocampus begins to operate and function that produces responses such as aggression, defensiveness, hyperactivity, the idea of how we begin to maneuver in the world, the Kluge-Bucy syndrome, for example, categorized by severe reduced fear and aggression and increased docility and hypersexuality is caused by some particular damage to the amygdala. This is a precursor to what we see in the areas of homicide and suicide within our communities. We must understand then that the damage to us that occurred in the context of the enslavement experience was not simply one that happened in the moment, but the encoding of that experience in the DNA has also passed on ways of addressing phenomena that could be healthy and less than healthy. We see that suicide rates within the Black population has increased. We've seen in 2020, suicide is the third leading cause of death for Blacks between the ages of 15 and 24. We've seen Black females grades 9 through 12 were 60% more likely to attempt suicide in 2019. We see that there's a process by which the psychic responses to the trauma that has been untreated has long-range effects. We must understand that these are compounded by dynamics of environmental racism, that talks about the issue of living in spaces that actually have poor health outcomes, such as Cancer Alley in Louisiana, where there's several oil refineries along the way that's killing our people. It also associated with oxidative stress, that something that happens when we deal with the dynamics of of free radicals within the body that causes the body to break down, which then can create conditions of Fragile X syndrome, chronic fatigue, the idea of heart and blood vessel disorders, arteriosclerosis, heart failure, heart attack, and inflammatory diseases. Also, we have cystic fibrosis, Crohn's disease, and others, and prostate cancer that occur as a result of trying to deal with and address dynamics around this trauma. So when we talk then about the healing process, it cannot be one in which we look at the European process of healing, because it has been the European dynamic of psychology that has created the conditions that we experience. But we must examine the idea of looking at how we address the trauma from our own perspective. We cannot use terms such as post-traumatic stress disorder. There is nothing post about the phenomena. The phenomena is ongoing. The following questions must be asked. What has been the impact of the generations of trauma on African people? What behavior markers do we expect to witness within a group that have experienced transgenerational trauma? What can be expected of their relationships with themselves and others? What behaviors and belief systems are that have been developed about themselves that we must look at? What role will denial play in the trauma responding, the trauma continuing to show itself within the organism of Black people? If denial is present, is healing possible? What is the best suited facilitative healing process? We advance then that the healing process must be one that examines the totality of the African experience, must be able to examine the process of epigenetic transference of data that suggests how one should respond. Because also epigenetic tells us that we're able to have healing modalities become encoded within the DNA that then can become passed on from generation to generation. That healing must be in the context of who we are as a people. That healing must be in the context of addressing the true dynamics of what it means to be human. We suggest then that the Ubuntu psychotherapy model is one of those models that looks at the humanity of a people and the connectivity of a people and begins to move into a space of healing and restoration. It is imperative that as we consider this process of moving forward and healing, we must be responsible, as has already been done, to look at the intergenerational aspects of the trauma and also begin to look at the intergenerational dynamics of the healing process. That is, how do we restore our people back to their original greatness? How do we look at the dynamics of trauma that has occurred not only within the context of the enslavement experience, but what occurred on the particular continent of Africa, the constant instability of being preyed upon for generations, the dynamics of economic instability that started not just simply with the enslavement experience, but we have evidence that shows that it started much sooner than that. In the 1300s and 1400s, that's deep data that talks about the agri-bee process and that how economic destabilization took place on the continent that moved into gold, that moved into sugar, that moved into cotton as the process that destabilized African people. What do we have to do now? That is, this organization, this movement, this moment is about the now movement. That is to move into the healing of the self-hate, the healing of the self-annihilation, the healing of that reality that has to be reestablished, that we are a people that come from a seed, of a seed, of a seed, of a seed, of the seed. The healing then reminds us that we are a great and marvelous people that have been resilient through all things, and that DNA also is within us to also be able to overcome all that has come against us. And so our healing modality must be that which reminds us of our true power, our purpose, and our passion. Thank you.
Dr. Washington, thank you so much. You have truly helped us to connect the dots, not only with what you were saying about generational trauma and healing that is necessary, but with all the speakers. I mean, what is really clear is that we are in a Sankofa moment. We are of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, right now. And that the healing that we embody, that we invite, is about yesterday, today, and tomorrow. People talk about, oh, that was slavery back then. That was like, no, you obviously do not understand. We are the embodiment of yesterday. We are the embodiment of today. We are the embodiment of the future. And you and all of our speakers have spoken so eloquently today. So repair is necessary. It is necessary for our humanity and for our spirits, for our souls. We must understand the legacy and the moment and the future together. These things cannot be separated. They work together. So thank you so much, Dr. Washington, for bringing to us, particularly the issues around trauma and mental health, with spiritual health, with physical health, the environment, all working together, either for the ill or for the good. And this moment, we claim hope. We claim hope. My dear friends, we are at the end of our time. We are 3 minutes over. We apologize. I don't think we did too bad given everything that was going on. But I want to invite you to come back for the second part of the series. Obviously, there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot more to do. There are other segments of the document we need to explore more deeply. We need to make those connections with what has been said today. Pull out your calendars right now. Please pull out your calendars right now. The organizing committee, Mr. Louise is sitting here, and there are others on this call, are with me. We have determined October the 20th. That would be October the 20th at 9:30 to 11 o'clock. Why 9:30? Because this is a global conversation. And we're trying to find a happy medium for those who got up later after their dinner time and those who got up earlier from the other side. So please work with us on that. 9:30 to 11 on the 20th of October. We will particularly be bringing up the SDGs that were brought up today, the issues of economics and trade, and then we will be threading what we've heard today and hearing more from you on October the 20th. I might add, World Food Day is that 16th of October, that Sunday, that week, those days before. We're acknowledging World Food Day, and we will also be recognizing World UN Day. That happens on the 24th of October. And then finally, the third part of the series will be December the 8th. Please write that down, December the 8th at 9:30 to 11. Again, this is the first part. We will be taking careful notes. Your committee will be working on your behalf. Please feel free to send us an email if you would like to be a part of post discussions until we get to the next discussion. We'd be glad to welcome you. But for now, we wish you a blessed Black August. We wish you a blessed United Nations International Day of People of African Descent on the 31st of August. And we thank God for you and what he or she will do because we have sought to be faithful. Thanks again to our wonderful committee that works together for these conversations. Thank you, everyone. Take care and God bless.